All right, hello guys. Today we are talking about what you need to be doing in the final couple of weeks before a big hike, a big trek, or a big mountain adventure. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this today is I've actually got a few clients, online clients, finishing up who are heading off on some trips in their own country, and they're sort of leading into their final weeks of preparation. And they've asked me what they sort of should be focusing on. So this is both to them, to Kerry and Joan, but also to anyone else who might be leading up to a big adventure and just curious about what they should be doing just before they go. Because quite often people get a little bit confused. They get told, look, I need to fit in as much training as I can, and they might want to train all the way up for an adventure. And they also get told they want to have a bit of a rest before they go. So those conflicting viewpoints can often be a bit confusing, and they can sort of just leave people feeling a little bit lost in these final weeks. And when you have everything else going on, you don't, like with your packing, with your final preparations, with saying goodbye to family and all of that, you don't want this extra stress of just wondering if you're doing the right things, wondering if you're risking losing fitness or compromising your time on the trail. So you want to be making sure you do the right things. So today I'm just going to talk you through a little checklist of things that I always recommend the final 2 weeks of your preparation, when you should start altering things before you go. So let's get into it. Now, first thing, we're going to start 2 weeks out from your leave date. Pretty much between 14 and maybe 17 days out, you want to be doing your final training hike. This means it's going to be the longest training hike you do, or potentially the heaviest training hike you do, or whichever one you've been building up to for all this time. So that's going to be your longest hike, about 14 to 17 days before you actually head off. You want to probably schedule that in your calendar way in advance, block out that time so you can fit that in. But yeah, about 14 to 17 days, that's your final big training hike. Now, once you've ticked that off, that's when we go into what's known as the taper phase, in which you start altering the volume and intensity of your training to make sure that your body is fully adapted, fully rested, fully recovered, and you're feeling your best before you hit the trail. Now, the important thing here is some people take this a little bit too far and they'll do absolutely nothing. And then that'll lead them to feeling a bit sluggish when they're hitting the trail. They might potentially have lost a few adaptations if they've done nothing for 2 weeks, and it's not something we really want. So what we want to do is just to go through a bit of a process to make sure this all plays out nicely. So in the second week before you go, basically with all your sessions, you want to be dropping the volume of your training sessions. So for example, if you're doing bike riding or walking or hiking or anything like that, you want to be dropping the distance pretty significantly. So I often recommend dropping it about 50% even. People are doing long hiking days and they might want to drop that even further. So you might go from a 10-hour hiking day down to a 2-hour hiking day or something like that. But whatever you're doing, you want to drop the volume quite a bit. Now, when you're looking at strength training or interval training, you might keep on doing the same weights or the same, hills or whatever you're doing, but just drop the number of sets. So you might just do, if you've been doing, 4 sets of a strength exercise, you might just do 2. If you've been doing, 6 or 7 or 8 intervals on a hill, you might just do 3 or 4. And you just want to reduce that down pretty significantly. So you're still doing something and you still got that weight, but you're not exerting yourself overly, and it should feel relatively comfortable to get through it. Now, on top of that, you want to have a think about swapping over what you can of your normal conditioning, the stuff on your feet, so you're hiking, you're walking, your loaded pack walking, whatever you're doing, to potentially off-feet conditioning. So if you have access to a bike, whether it's a stationary bike or just a push bike, if you have access to a cross trainer, if you have access to a pool, it might be worthwhile swapping out quite a decent portion of that out to off-feet conditioning. Now, the idea behind that is in these final 2 weeks, we want all the joints to really get a solid, good rest. Meaning we want them fully adapted, recovered, repaired before you hit the trail. So if you can find instances where you can substitute work that you're doing on your feet, where you're putting strain through those joints, to something that's a little bit nicer in these final weeks, that's probably going to be pretty beneficial. So have a think about that. Now, on top of this is the big risk factor time where many people get sick. Now, all the stress going on, all the final preparations, you're probably not sleeping well, you might be saying goodbye to people, your nutrition might go out the window. All of these things lead into people just really commonly getting sick before they go, which is obviously isn't a good thing, because it can get in the way of your final sessions. It can, drag on and get in the way of your adventure. It's just not a good thing. So you want to be really focusing on being super, super hygienic during this time. I think way back in the early days of this podcast, I did an episode around staying healthy or avoiding getting sick on the trail. So you might want to go over that if you're in this stage. But you want to do everything you can. Just stay super hygienic, avoid sick people, make sure you're using hand sanitizer, make sure you're looking after yourself, and really, really overemphasize that. Now, on top of this, a lot of people generally will struggle with their sleep during this time. So here's where you really want to get strict with your sleep hygiene, meaning if there's anything in the past you've done which has helped your sleep, you want to be doing this in these final weeks. That means avoiding blue screen like an hour before going to bed. That means having any sleep aids, whether it's chamomile tea, lavender oil, or whatever you're using. That means having a bit of detox time at the end of the day, doing a bit of journaling, reading a book, writing a gratitude journal. Whatever you need to do, start doing this in the final 2 weeks if you haven't been doing it, because you're gonna need it. And then finally, in this second to last week, you want to be focusing on stress reduction as well, because as I said, stress is going to be way up and that can put you at a risk of being sick as well as just not feeling great. So you want to do whatever you can to reduce stress here. Now, really easily for hikers, which are pretty relevant, you might put a bit of emphasis into foam rolling and stretching every single day, doing some yoga, every couple of days, or just doing some specific stress reduction techniques. All of that is going to be good. So in the second to last week before you go, drop that volume, look at off-peak conditioning, don't get sick, look after your sleep, and reduce your stress. Now, in your final week before you head off, and this is the last 7 days or so, you want to basically drop the intensity and the volume again from your training. So you're still doing something and you're still trying to get in as many training sessions as you were doing, but by no means you're doing anywhere near as much or as difficult sessions. This last one is just literally just to keep your body moving over very, very slightly, just work out any kinks or aches and pains and make sure you're feeling good. So if you're doing your strength sessions, now you've dropped both the sets and you're also going to drop the weight. So everything you're going through just feels really, really easy. Same thing for the intervals. If you were doing intervals with a pack, do it without a pack. If you were doing long runs or something, just you're going to turn that into a walk. If you were doing a hike, you're definitely not hiking this week. And so just really, really think, where can you reduce the intensity and also the volume for all your work? So you're still doing something, but it's not much and it's not difficult at all. Ideally, again, the majority of any type of conditioning stuff you're going to do or any type of cardio stuff is going to be off your feet. So swimming, pool walking, cycling, cross trainer, stuff like that. That's really, really gentle on the joints, just to give everything a nice rest. And in the last couple of days, you want to sort of have a think about your final prep. So now everything's getting a bit manic. You probably don't need to be doing any type of training aside from what you need to do just to reduce stress. So if you need to go for a walk or a swim just to calm yourself down, that's fine. But aside from that, the last couple of days, there definitely shouldn't be any difficult training going on. And here you want to start emphasizing your carbohydrates. So in the last podcast the other day, we were talking about carbohydrate loading before an adventure. This is where you just want to start sort of, you don't have to go crazy with it, you don't have to go mental with it, but just making sure each meal you have has some type of serving of carbohydrates and start to slowly load up those stores. And then just tick off all the final things you need to do. Make sure your bag's packed, make sure you double ticked everything, make sure you've cut your toenails so you don't get those black toenails on the first descent you have. Make sure everything's sorted out in these last couple of days. But that's sort of generally what I recommend the last couple of weeks before a hike should look like. Obviously, everyone's going to be a bit different and everyone's going to have different situations, but you really want to be smart about your training here. So you can find that balance between not doing too much and being tired leading into your hike, but also not doing enough and feeling sluggish and potentially losing some adaptations you've been chasing. So follow that process. I find that works pretty well for most people. Everyone does react differently to it and everyone does need a little bit different needs, but it can work pretty well for most. So if you are leading into an adventure, maybe save this one and have a listen to it again later, or revisit it further down the line when you're in those final 2 weeks before you go. So I do hope you've enjoyed this podcast today, guys. I do hope you got a bit of value out of it. As always, if you have enjoyed it, I would love if you can leave a rating and review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. It really would mean the absolute world to me. So thank you so much for listening again, and we'll talk to you soon.